Right, then I will call to order this regular council meeting 1575 for Tuesday, February 28th. In honor of the Leewat, the village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Leewat Nation. Following council members are attending in person: myself, Councillor Katrina Nightingale, Councillor Laura Ramsden, and Councillor Ted Craddock. Those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, moved as presented. Craddock, seconded by Councillor Ramsden. Any opposed? Carries. With none. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting 1574 from February 7th, moved by Councillor Nightingale, seconded by Councillor Craddock. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising? None. A little bit of business arising from committee of the whole from February 7th. The committee rose with the following recommendation for council's consideration: that the nature play park playscape feature be relocated to the option 2 location, which is the linear pocket park between the Spring Park and the Radius building. So we have a number of correspondence on this as well. So
may I just make a
yes,
note that as of last night, staff have received 3 more letters regarding the nature play park, 2 of which were in favor of option 1, and 1 which was seeking a potential alternative elsewhere beyond option 2. So 3 letters.
Okay.
That have been shared with you in your email as of this morning. Or
we'll share. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to get them out to council, so I will get them out to you. My apologies.
Okay. Thank you. Craddock?
Yeah, to do with this and the letters, if it's the right time to say, because we're going to approve this motion. It seems that all the letters I wrote or read, the majority of people concerned about the trees and the chance that they may be taken down or that. I'd just like to make sure that we direct administration to make sure the trees that are there, they work within them and add more trees if necessary. So the shade area and the trees was the biggest issue coming out of all those letters. It wasn't so much where it was going, I didn't feel, but more about the shade and the trees. So when we're dealing with the consultants and they're revisiting that site and how they're going to do it, I think I'd like to see them work around the trees if possible, and they're young trees, so they could be uprooted and moved to different locations. So
I think that is one of the things that they had spoken about, that there may be the potential of picking up the existing trees and moving them to other locations.
Great.
Christine, does that, sorry, Ms. Burns, does that go along with what you have heard from the consultants as well? Mm-hmm.
super, and I think
There'll be more, not less.
more than less, and that's what I think people wanted to hear. So thank you for that. I don't think we need to add that. It sounds like it's already in place in there.
Okay.
I'll move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Discussion. Thanks. No open discussion then. I'm not entirely in agreement that the shade trees are the only and main item of concern. It sounds like we have 3 more letters for a total of 27 letters opposed to option 2, 1 letter opposed, 1 letter opposed to option 1, and it sounds like now a total of 4 letters which are seeking perhaps other options. So I'm still not comfortable supporting this direction at this point. I wasn't at committee of the whole, and with this letter, with the amount of input we've received from the public, I won't be supporting this motion. I'd like to see us discuss it further. It's interesting to me. We a big part of the conversation when we discussed this at the committee of the whole was that we were looking at option 2 because we were listening to the residents, is what I heard from several councillors around the table. That they heard from residents that option 2 was being preferred. We had no such correspondence, and I hadn't heard from any residents myself saying anything similar to that. So I wasn't prepared to support the motion at committee of the whole. Now we have heard from a large number of folks And so in my opinion, if we were to just go ahead and push forward like this, we're not listening to our residents, which again seemed to be a big motivating factor in coming to the decision that the committee of the whole did at the time. Again, there's 27 letters in the opposition to option 2, 1 letter in opposition to option 1. I think this conversation has been become quite public, and many people had the opportunity to weigh in, and just in what we've seen from folks so far, I don't think going this direction is the will of the people. So I'm struggling with supporting that. I don't believe that shade was the only issue. There were a lot of other issues raised, from being jammed in there and crammed, from being too close to the radius building, too close to the spray park, not allowing enough room for the spray park to expand. So I heard a whole host of other options rather than just trees. And so I will not be supporting this motion at this point. Councillor Nangle and Councillor Ramsden, go ahead.
Thanks for I feel after reading all the correspondence really carefully that the overriding message to me, which was a really good message, was the importance of trees in this community and shade. There was contradictions within, some people wanted an expansion of the play park, while other people were concerned about noise. So there's a contradiction in there. But the overriding theme and message was shade and trees. And obviously, we know as we move forward, that's going to be a challenge in many ways in our community as we get warmer and the climate changes. So I still feel very firmly that green space is a space for all people. And most of the people that have written in have the privilege of viewing it from their perspective, which we all do. But there are elders in our community, there are teenagers in our community, there are people with mobility issues in our community, and we need to consider them as well. And what it has highlighted for me is that we need to create shade and space for all of those people, not just for one interest group. I don't know how this works, but I wouldn't be opposed to considering somewhere not even there, because some people did bring that up. We have other beautiful green spaces in town and they're not being utilized. And as our community grows, why not have more spaces for kids to play outside of that one area, right? Someone did mention Pioneer Park, and I don't know if that's possible at all, but that focal point of the community is if we change that, we're not getting it back. And when people drive into town, either as community members or as tourists coming to town, that is center ice for this community. And it needs to be a welcoming space for all people. And kids' infrastructure, if it keeps spreading out, will impose on that space for all people. And yeah, so my feeling is I haven't changed my thoughts on that. It needs to be for everybody, but I'm very willing to consider it somewhere else in town to create more kid infrastructure, play infrastructure, shady infrastructure for kids elsewhere.
Right, get to Councillor Ramsden. Is there any requirement because of the way the way the playscape was funded that it needs to be near daycare, or can it be any?
It is an asset of PBIS, and Ms. Burns can do any clarification around this. And it will, any recommended location or any location that we would land on will need to go to PBIS. There is nothing, though, I think at this juncture that would constrain it to being on the Great Lawn, but certainly as your advisor, I would recommend that were you to take this approach of exploring other options, that I would advise public engagement would be the next reasonable step in going through this process wholly, so that we're not continuing to come back around. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
This is, I think, kind of where my comment is coming from. I'm very close to kind of in the middle on this decision. And I think what I'm hearing from the table is that this is this is a decision that we are basing on what our community values, as well as there's a strong voice from the community. And I think if those are going to be two of the main factors in making this decision, which it seems to be, then we need to go out and properly investigate that. And I feel at this point, given how strong some members of the public feel, whether it's for option 2, option 1, and this discussion about values, because I do think that that's that is one green space that we do have. Is I think at this point, I wouldn't feel comfortable necessarily landing one way or the other. And I think public engagement, regardless of what we do, because I do think, a lot of the communication we're hearing right now that we have says it seems to be more in favor of option 1. That being said, what segment of the population does that represent? I mean, if that could, depending on where the post is, that might only be a certain segment of the of Pemberton that's seeing that. So is that the general feel within the community? So I think at this point, given the fact that we seem to be relying so heavily again on values and the public's, what people would like to see from this playscape, that I think at this point we'd be better off not making a decision and actually going out and seeking public engagement and maybe doing it in a way so that we don't keep, we've got limited resources. There's a lot of other stuff that we have to accomplish. So taking the time now, because this seems to be a very, very important decision for the community, taking the time to do it properly, do the public engagement so that we can make a decision and move forward. So for that, I would not be supporting the resolution.
I guess one of the questions I would have is, what does public engagement look like and how much cost is it going to be? Council made a decision at meeting of the whole to move forward with this. I know that we received 25 letters, but I've been here long enough to know that doesn't represent the community. I've talked to people in my neighborhood, which is the Glen, which is an average age of 36, and everybody has 1 or 2 children. I have yet to talk to anybody, and I've made a point of this over the last 2 weeks, talking to neighbors and people with kids and saying, what is your feeling about it? The biggest option they have to option 1, they take 2 kids to the park. Susie wants to play in the water. Johnny wants to play down the other end. Now they're completely opposite end of the field. And they don't, and when we had the report come back, the one issue that came up that was not a good highlight for option 1 was the safety. Now, if safety doesn't hit the bell when you're talking about kids, and I heard parents say, no, I don't want the kids at the other end of the playfield. I can't watch them. Where it's up here in option 2, I can sit between the 2, and it just makes it a lot better. So we don't have a full council here, which is unfortunate. I'm not sure that going back to the public is necessary. I think that's an added cost. But we don't, I can see if we have a vote right now, it's probably going to be a tie vote. Unfortunately, Council Helmer isn't here. So I'm not too sure where I want to go with this. I say again, I don't think 25 letters represents the community. You never hear from the silent majority. And I think that's who elected us. And that's who we have to think about. So I appreciate the letters, and that's why I said off the start, I want to work with some of those people that talked about the trees in the shade. I don't particularly see that we want to move this to a different site. This is a communal area where kids have got daycare. We're going to have over 100 kids in that area. What are they going to do? Go from there to Pioneer Park or down by the barn or something to play? I think we have to consolidate it in one place. So I'm still in favor of the motion that's being brought forward.
Thank you. I find that interesting that we get a bunch of letters and that's not representing the community. A conversation on the streets that the rest of us aren't privy to is representative of the community. I would suggest that to all of us, it would be really, really good practice when we bump into folks that tell us things that are on their minds and important, then we encourage them to write us so that all of council has the same information in front of us. Because what I heard loud and clear at the last meeting was that we were basing this decision on the will of the community and what they wanted to see there. So I find it very challenging to base my decision on the will of the community based on conversations that we've had with Johnny and Susie's parents on the street. So to me, we've got a number of letters here that are indicating that there is not consensus on this. There are some strong feelings here. I very much agree with Councillor Ramsden's suggestion that at this point, we've got some big points, different concerns across the spectrum on here. And I feel with what's in front of us now, considering again, I have not had one person approach me, and I'm in town a lot too. I spend a lot of time speaking to folks as well, and I haven't had one person make those comments to me verbally, but I do have 27 letters with only one supporting option 2 in here. So I do not feel that I'm listening to the residents if I would just go based on what I'm seeing right now. So considering that we're conflicted, considering that there's a lot of values being considered here, I'm very much in support of the suggestion that we seek a little bit more input from the community. I'm not sure if that looks like I totally agree with Councillor Craddock. There is capacity issues. We can't go huge public engagement on every issue we decide. We have to also make decisions here at the table. But I'm certainly not comfortable supporting option 2 with what I've got in front of me right now and what we're hearing from the community. So maybe I could ask staff, actually, before I do that.
Well, just wondering, I mean, again, I completely agree in terms of we've got limited resources. We've spent considerable time already on this decision. So, I mean, even if it's, I don't know if the possibility is just to say, you know, a simple call to submissions. It's because I understand that people are busy and taking time to write an email to mayor and council is time that not necessarily everybody has, but even saying, you know, it would be sufficient for you to send in an email that says option 1, option 2, something like that. Keeping it simple so that, you know, I don't know, a shorter time frame doesn't require necessarily a lot of effort from people.
For me, it feels like the bigger issue is what is the value of that in the entirety of that space from a civic perspective. Like it has been mentioned that, well, Canada Day only comes once. Well, perhaps we'll use it for Truth and Reconciliation Day. Perhaps. One thing that COVID taught us was that people missed gathering. And people of all varieties and all genders and all ages, we missed gathering together. And when we lose a space to gather, I think that's a real loss to a community. So for me, it's not the question of where should it be. It's a question of what does that space mean to this community? Because I said it last time, I love kid infrastructure, but it does spread into other aspects. It doesn't just stay in a little place. It then spreads, right? And we as councillors need to think of everybody in this community. And the letters were from the perspective primarily of one interest group. And I heard it loud and clear, and I was a mom and I get it. But for me, if we're going to go back to the community, I feel like the question has to be not, is it there? It has to be a much bigger question, because that is the question. It's a values question. What is that space? What is the value of that space? Not is a play part going up there or down there. It's much bigger, in my opinion.
Okay, maybe I could ask, you know, I could look to staff in terms of talking about capacity, suggestions towards engagement. Do you have the ability? What could it look like?
Absolutely. If this were the will of council, probably something as simple as just launching a simple survey that could be done through our social media and on our website. Of course, we have our tool that we use for this type of feedback, which is the Have Your Say. It could certainly be there as well. And then depending on what the timeline is that council wishes, we could, you know, put a time box in, right? We have the feedback in a matter of time, which enables decisions to be made, you know, prior to summer really setting in if the wishes to move it, you know, by the time of what it wants.
With that, and just throwing an idea, would we be able to like mark out the options on the field and maybe put like a little sign or something so that people have a visual, like a physical visual when they're there? Because that, I don't, again, we're talking capacity, so this is again, to me, the visual is the most important, right? We're talking about the space, how much space gets off, talking about safety, what does that look like? And so, I'm just wondering.
We can make anything happen.
Careful what you say.
Don't worry. Like I said, we can definitely. With the council and the community. Do our due diligence for sure.
I would just like to make sure, you know, we talked to, somebody mentioned, you know, other demographic seniors and that sort of thing. So survey, I think would be really helpful. Seniors might not necessarily see that on social media, so I want to make sure that maybe there's something physical, visible on the site. People can
Yeah.
say, hey, have your say.
Absolutely. We certainly could work with, we have current signage there that originally had the option one, but now that is covered up, but we can put a QR code on it or even just direct people to a location. And there could even be some physical paper surveys at the community center just to make sure that we're barrier free in terms of the feedback.
Yeah, a little poster, a large poster in the community center, say, go out and have a look and let us know what you think.
We do have some direct links to various senior community groups as well as the senior center. So we're happy to.
Yeah, and that's just an example. Seniors is one example.
For them, as well as for the youth, as well as for the children themselves. So we do see a few of them.
I mean, the overriding thing at the point of, common point here is that we want to respond to what the community wants on this. I mean, I think that's where we all agree quite easily here. So we're just trying to make sure that engagement looks, go ahead.
And I was just wondering with the have your say, because Councillors Nightingale's comment, I think, is taken very well, because I do remember way back at the beginning that part of the conversation that I understood that happened around the location of the basketball court was the value the community placed on the contiguous space. And I going back to that comment about values, is I don't know if it's possible within the have your say, if there's a way of phrasing a question that says something along the line of, is it important to you that we protect a certain level of contiguous space within the green space or something like that? Because we talked about how to potentially kind of not avoid the situation, but moving forward is if this is a value within the community, if we can have that outlined clearly for us, then that might be allow us to also give a clear, directions moving forward. So we can say, okay, any future development, this space is, that this is a priority to maintain and not encroach on. So I don't know if that's a possibility.
Councillor Gelvin, Councillor Jack.
I agree with Councillor Ramsden. I think the way it's framed will definitely, it can be very leading or it can be very transparent. And that's what I was saying before, is I think the questions it has to be framed in such a way that it's not just about the play structures, it's about the value of the space. And my only concern with mapping it out is that then you're not visualizing a whole row of trees as the original picture showed with picnic tables on it without something there. Do you know what I mean? By closer to Mount Currie, option 2. I keep getting the options mixed up, but yeah. Anyways, what I'm saying is visuals can also create bias, and it's more about the value of the space in the bigger picture and 20 years down the road. We have 5,000 people in this community, and we are gathering on Canada Day, and we are gathering on Truth and Reconciliation Day, and we are gathered for who knows what. So I agree with Councilor Benson. I think we have to be very careful how the question is framed, so it's not leading.
Yeah, and I just want to back that up, and a good point that you brought up, Councilor Ramsden, was the fact that the previous council was faced with the same issue we're faced with right now. How much of the green space do we want to utilize? And due to that, the basketball court was not allowed to go in that space. I don't know how the square footage equals between this and that, but it's going to use up the same amount of space on the green. And when we took that into consideration, I believe part of it was the reason we didn't want the basketball court, because we wanted to protect the green space. And that's why the basketball court is where it is and not on there. So I think we also have to remember what the values of community is looking at and why we didn't put the basketball court there in the first place. So we didn't do that, why are we putting this there?
Go ahead.
And that is the reason I think. If we're gonna go to the effort of reaching out to the community and talk about, option one, option two. I think it would be great to talk, bring in this question about the green space, because I do take your point that evidently was a conversation that previous council may have had. But what has been apparent to me is that information hasn't. If it wasn't documented or expressed in such a way that it's translated. And so that's what I'm just thinking about, kind of, avoiding a repeat of the situation down the road, is saying, okay, what do we do differently in this conversation as compared to what happened with the discussion around the basketball court? So we don't run into this issue. So we're not spending additional time and resources coming back to what I understand from you, Councillor Craddock, is that to your mind that this was something that was previously expressed by council. And so just making sure that, we're not doing this again in 4 years' times or something like that. So that's the only reason I appreciate that is a conversation that previous council had. I was not aware of it. I haven't seen that, there's not no policy decision or something in front of me. I understand the decision, the basketball court was placed where it was for several reasons, one of which was that. But I was just thinking, kind of institutionally, how do we move forward so we don't do this again?
Yeah, and then, so that's good, and I have full confidence in staff. They've heard all the comments at the table in terms of the values being discussed, and so I'm confident that they will all be referenced and included in that engagement. I think the basketball court, much as I love basketball, an asphalt surface with a chain link fence that's 12 feet high or 16 feet high around it in the middle of the field is a little bit different from a nature play park. So I don't know that it's apples to apples. But I'm hearing all these values that need to be considered. I feel like staff have heard those as well. I don't know if there's any questions from staff in terms of, before we move towards resolutions again, in terms of what that engagement should look like or could look like, or if you have any thoughts or input, or you've heard everything you need to hear.
I think we have everything.
Okay. So we have a motion. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just one last thing, because it seems contentious even within council. Before that goes out to the public, I'd like to see it brought back to council. Because I'm hearing people at the table say, well, let's make sure this is in there, let's make sure this is in there. I would also like to see kind of an open house kind of thing on the site, so people can actually go. And with the recreation director's experience of setting it up out there, they can actually see it. So I'd like to see that prior to us going to the public with it.
Okay.
Do you want me to defer to the next meeting, Mayor? Is that
Well, your motion has been seconded, so you would have to
rescind?
rescind
Or you have to withdraw your.
or withdraw. Yeah.
I'll withdraw
The
and
motion is withdrawn, a motion to have staff come back to council committee of the whole. Let's go back to committee of the whole with this.
but then we have to go back to council again,
I know, but we're gonna have to go through this process of reviewing it all anyway.
which makes sense. in
So
committee.
I don't know. I mean, it's not a big different or deal to me, but council committee of the whole makes more sense to
Say
staff.
future committee of the whole, just
Yeah.
because I think that.
Timing wise, we may not be able to turn it around super quickly, but it may be.
For this afternoon's committee of the whole. won't be long.
Is that too quickly?
Yeah, motion to have staff bring back to a future committee of the whole. An engagement plan on the location of the nature plane. That specific enough?
Yeah.
Move, seconder. Any further discussion? Opposed? Motion carries. Run. Okay, that takes us to number 7, committee minutes. We have none, no delegations. Staff reports, 9.1, CAO verbal report, CEO Tracy.
I just wanted to make one mention of gratitude to members of council who have come and supported the OCP process at the school, I had my first chance to attend at Signal Hill. And I just think it was a really sort of magical chance to engage with the kids on their level as to what their vision for the community is. And so further thanks to Development Services and Colin Brown for all of the thoughtful work that has gone into supporting the community engagement on the OCP. So, and thanks to you all. That's a real privilege.
Thank you. I missed the Signal Hill, but I got the École de la Vallée one, and I was really impressed about how engaged the kids were. Like, they were sure it was similar to, they were right in there. They were, although it made me laugh. The first kid that put up their hand with me went, "What about a pool?" The first kid. I'm like, all right, next generation. Yeah, there you go.
And then further to that, for members of the public who are in attendance today via Zoom, there will be an OCP public open house held at the community center next Monday. So look forward to seeing people there that evening.
Awesome. And when are we at the high school, do you know?
I don't think the dates have been selected. Yeah.
That's it. Motion to receive, please. Councilor Scratick, seconded by. Councilor Ramsden, any opposed? Motion carries. 9.2 corporate legislative services. This is about the dissolution of the mayor's task force in COVID-19. Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me this morning. So this report is a request the council dissolve the mayor's task force on COVID-19 response and recovery committee. This was a select committee of council that was established in June of 2020 to sort of bring the community together to talk about how we can deal with responding and working on some of the elements that we were presented with as a result of COVID. The pandemic. The committee consisted of a member of the Chamber of Commerce, a member from Tourism Pemberton, someone who represented the financial industry, Work BC, Sea to Sky Community Services, mental health professional, and 3 community members at large. It also included the CAO, our senior communications and grant coordinator at the time, and a representative from corporate and legislative services to manage all of the administration of the committee. The committee met on several occasions, and through that work that the committee did, the Pemberton area, or the One Pemberton Virtual Hub was established, which is a link that people could go to gather information for one-stop shopping to get information about what was happening and where they could go for resources. That hub is still up and operating and is monitored by our communications coordinator who updates as changes were in effect. So the work of the committee has pretty much come to an end with the pandemic concluding. And so select committees are established to deal with specific issues. And then once their work is done, the committee is then dissolved. So as the work of the committee has been completed, we're seeking council's approval to dissolve the mayor's task force on COVID-19 response and recovery.
Thank you.
Any questions?
One question, was there any money left over from that, or was it just there's no money involved in
There was
it?
no budget attached to it.
Okay,
It was it was a really interesting collection of community members.
Yeah.
It was a great group, but there was no budget attached to it. And it was funny because that was an element of everything we talked about at the committee. I was like, okay, where's the budget? You know, everything's got a dollar figure attached to it. But there was a few smaller, items that came out of it. Relationships was a really big thing that I think came out of it. That's where I really started having great conversations with Jay from Sea to Sky Community Services, and that's where the housing project conversation first began. And then the virtual hub, as Ms. Fraser talked about, was one of the bigger goals that was directed. And then the hope was, or the thought was, if it carried on, was to look, and if that worked well, was a physical hub. The discussion too, just to give a little context, was, we found during the pandemic, we were amazed by how much residents came to local government for information from should I keep my business open, to where do I access funds relief for this or that, like anything under the sun that people have concerns about, they can ask. And which was kind of, wow, nice in some way, that we were the organization that they felt comfortable searching for answers. So the hub was an idea, okay, there's mental services out there, there's financial supports, there's all kinds of things. How do we bring it together to a hub, into a virtual hub? And the thought was maybe down the road, that would also become a physical hub. And part of the conversation was through Sea to Sky Community Services could be food bank. And then again, once the idea, the development of that housing started, which was after the fact, maybe we'd be there, but yeah, that was sort of the direction, but there was we at the village never put a budget to that. Go ahead.
I think what you might have heard is that there was money given to us short of $1 million for response and recovery, but I believe that's coming to us in the budget. Obviously, it's not today, but in the following week. So that's where we'll find out what's left in that budget and how we can utilize that fund.
Are you talking about the COVID restart funds?
Yeah.
Is that what you were referring to?
No, I was just, well, I know that exists, but no, I was just actually wondering if this involved any money. And, because with COVID, there was a lot of money
Yeah.
thrown around and then people are having to spend it and not spend it and give it back and.
Council Graddick's talking, but that's the only funds we.
Oh, okay.
Council, if I may, through Mayor, council did in 2020 hold a 0% in budget. So there was no tax increase that year.
Yeah.
So we were limited in what we were able to facilitate. But the virtual hub was very, I think, well used and very much appreciated because it did give people one place to go and try to find information. There was a lot of work in keeping it updated as things constantly changed. And then the province did come out the following year with the COVID restart, which is completely different. Yes.
Awesome. Did we get a mover yet?
No, we haven't.
Yes. Moved by Councilor Graddick, seconded and moved to dissolve the task force by Councilor Graddick, seconded by Councilor Nightingale. In discussion, opposed, carries. On a 9.3, permanent fire rescue, the community wildfire resilience plan. Chief Adams, morning.
Morning, thank you, Mayor and Council. My report is just to bring you guys the community wildfire resiliency plan for adoption. Committee of a whole, Quentin did a great job presenting the overall report of the community, the CWRP. It is a 100-page report, so it is fairly long. I think you did an excellent job of breaking that down for you guys. A little bit of a background, we did have what is similar to CWRP that it was approved in 2017, and this is just an updated version. There's been a lot of changes obviously within our community as well during that time. The Community Resiliency Investment Grant, which is essentially the Fire Smart Grant, is that the funds for this CWRP came through that grant, and it is a part of their duties to update the CWRP through that grant to continue on, and we had to have a recent CWRP to apply for further grants. The grant or the CWRP itself was actually assisted through the Community Fire Smart Resiliency Committee. That was made up from some of the members of the fire department, the Fire Smart team themselves, members from the VOP and the community forest and the Wild Nation as well. So, and Councilor Techcraft. We were all had input into that CWRP with the platform. And that's all the information I have. Open questions.
Any questions? You want to take us through the whole report again?
If you also want to take me through the whole report, I'm happy to answer some questions through it, but if there is any
Questions? We make a motion. Got it, seconded by Mr. Ramsden, opposed, Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff. We make fun of the 100 pages, there's a lot of great information. I ran through it again.
It is actually a great report.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on to number 10.1 special events bylaw. Ms. Burns. Morning.
Morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me. And so as we're making some adjustments to some bylaws. So the first bylaw to review has been the special events bylaw. So prior to COVID, the bylaw had categories of minor and major events. We're very aware that post-COVID, everyone is really excited about getting back out there and doing things. However, as a result of recreation becoming an aspect of operations that the village facilitates, we're doing all of the booking coordination for village outdoor spaces. And what we've come to realize is that we needed to adjust this bylaw so that it's operationally more effective for staff. What we have requested is that we remove minor events and that major events reaching a capacity of 600 or less are no longer a part of the special event bylaw. Anything over 600 would be considered a special event. We have taken that threshold of a capacity because the capacity for the barn is 635. So any events in the barn that would be required, the whole a space would be required to follow the special events bylaw. So that would be something like the barn dance or what Pemberton Arts Council did last year with music in the mountains. And we move forward from that perspective. I am open to questions, but ultimately I would like council to accept my recommendation that special events bylaw number 940 2023 be given for second and third reading at this time.
Questions? I have a question.
Sure.
When I went from the special event bylaw to the parks and whatever some of those cases in terms of managing, and I love the idea of making it simpler for especially our community groups to hold events. But I was just wondering, and maybe I missed it, within the public parks bylaw, does it speak to or allow for the controls around like bathrooms and garbage management and that sort of thing? Is that embedded in the public? Because I didn't feel like it was.
That it's not necessarily embedded in the bylaw per se, it's embedded in the staff procedures moving forward. So for instance, anything under the capacity of 600, we have public facilities for bathrooms in those spaces that accommodate that number right off the bat. So should the special events bylaw be triggered for the barn, for instance, then that triggers the process that we go through from a booking perspective in insisting that they, get extra porta potties for their event.
For parking.
In parking and public notices and all of those things. So anything under that number, if it's at the barn and it's significant in any capacity, then public communication is something that we trigger. But the porta potties accommodate that.
I just want to, I don't want, I like the fact that you try to simplify, I really do. I just also know from experience, and this isn't a criticism, that many folks like to run events and they don't necessarily have a ton of experience.
Yeah.
And they don't know some of the ins and outs of how many washrooms you need, what kind of parking traffic management you might need, that sort of thing. And, I'd love to see sort of recycling and the diversion of whatever comes out of there, be part of.
Yes, definitely. Those are all trigger points in the staff booking process. So hence trying to simplify the special events bylaw at this time, because that triggers a lot of different administration than just a park use permit. The park use permit tends to be much more simplistic. However, if it was somebody and they were expecting 500, then we're going to turn it on to the 630 right off the bat. Right, so it kind of comes down to staff decision-making processes at that point in time. So anything that is in what the booking coordinator considers a site zone, we discuss and trigger accordingly. We just need the bylaw so that it's definitive for that purpose. And the barn is the primary special event space where we anticipate larger numbers.
Or the rail.
Potentially, yes. Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Councilor Nangle.
Through the mayor, I just want a clarification on one thing. So if a group comes in and want to use the barn because it is a covered space and it obviously makes sense to use it, but they're a nonprofit and they really have no idea who's going to show, as often is the case. There's been a couple of situations I can think of, and they don't get a lot of numbers.
Mhm.
How does that work then in terms of, is there they are a nonprofit, do they still pay the same no matter what? Like if it holds 600 people, but they get 50? And then it's for naught, like how does that work?
Yeah, so it's kind of, that's part and parcel of the staff time and energy that goes into working with an organization like that. So hence the administration component and trying to simplify it for staff so that it triggers.
If I can, a number of years ago, we did do a process where we looked at the barn and in terms of what the rentals and that kind of thing would be, and council approved the approach on that. And just to speak to Ms. Burns, the permit fee is one thing, and it's very nominal for a nonprofit. It's only $30, and the rental fee is only $100. So whether you have 10 or 35 or whatever, those are the fees that have been set since I think 26, just after the barn was born. The barn was born. But it is something that Ms. Burns and I and Mr. Sikora have talked about looking at in terms of what that looks like going forward as we get busier. But the rental rates are not, and the rental rate and the permit rates are not changing for barn bookings in particular.
Mhm.
But if it was under a special event bylaw, it is more expensive. So this actually takes away that cost. It makes it easier for a nonprofit to run an event there in terms of the financial impact.
Can I answer that?
Yes, thanks.
That comes next.
It's all part and parcel of the communication aspect with the user group. But if they want the whole barn and they are expecting X, then triggers a special event. Otherwise, our choose permit. So.
And so they can use the parking for that space too?
Yeah,
Okay, got it.
yeah,
That's
sorry,
fair.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you.
No worries.
Any other questions? Somebody like to move the recommendation? Councilor Craddock, seconded by Councilor Nightingale. Any discussion? Opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Burns, takes 10.2 airport establishment operation fees bylaw. Hazer.
Good morning again. So this bylaw is to introduce a change to the airport establishment operations and fees bylaw by including a clause respecting the requirement for deposit if anybody is interested in pursuing a lease at the airport. And what that deposit will cover is the survey costs, the advertising, the notice of disposition, any legal fees that may be associated with the preparation of the lease, and then the registration of the lease, which is to Land Title Office. This came about as a result of a resolution that came forward last year from council, where they requested that staff look into establishing a deposit of $5,000 as a way of making sure that the village is able to effectively cost recover on any of those elements. And over the last year, we've had increases in cost to advertising, and depending on the amount of legal activity that may or may not take place, that rate can shift. So staff is proposing that we ask for a deposit of $6,500
to pursue a lease agreement. If any of that is not expended, it will be returned to the applicant at the conclusion of the lease agreement. Oh,
I thought,
It's a mistake in the write-up. It says 6 and 1 and 65.
Yeah, that's what I was just.
sorry, we're, and, oh,
76.
176. I think the fees and charges bylaw says 6,500, sorry.
Page 177 under B.
My apologies.
So it's okay. Just
77. Yeah, under the fees
Yeah,
and
that's-
charges bylaw.
typing errors on.
Sorry.
I'm gonna get a discount, but I can't.
And in the fees and charges, 6,500, yes, okay, well, council can give me directions whether they want 6,000 or 500. You have a choice. I'm offering you an opportunity to choose what you'd like. Just to confuse matters. At any rate, in order to establish that a deposit is required, we do need to make an amendment to the airport establishment operations and fees bylaw to incorporate a clause that identifies a deposit, and then that is reflected in the fees and charges bylaw, which will be the next bylaw we're seeking council's support for. So now that we've clarified it's 6,500, does anybody have any questions?
I wasn't confused until I thought I got here. So just to be clear, and I'll open it for questions in a sec. If we're gonna change it to 6 or 65, that would be a 10.3, not a 10.2 here, or would be?
Yeah, and 10.3, yes, fees and charges, so, yes, what we're looking for now is council support in adding the deposit requirement into the establishment bylaw, the airport establishment bylaw.
Questions, Councilor Crab?
Now, that's only once a person's determined they want to go ahead. If they come in
Yes.
and ask for what a lease agreement looks like, and that's still pro bono.
Yes, so I field probably anywhere from 4 to 6 inquiries a year. Sometimes the inquiries are from the same people over several years. And they'll just check in to see if there's still these slots available but the intention is that if they are ready to go and they submit their actual proposal, then the first step would be to seek a deposit so that we know that they're serious, because I have had people who've come forward year over year and never actually moved anything forward, and we've spent money advertising and then they've walked away. So
If I might follow up too, what have we got? 2 more lots available on the East Taxiway? 2 or 3 more lots?
we have 2 lots available along the East Taxiway, but there is potential for more.
Yeah, and have we ever done a plan on the rest of the site to see if we put in? Would have to be paved, I guess, or packed gravel? How many lots would be still available?
We could, behind the East Taxiway lots, the intention was that the lots could be developed behind that. It would require a lot of fill. Not only to bring up the access road and the easement road, but the lots themselves. So we would have to look at what that looks like in terms of what the village is prepared to put towards that. But if we do go, we can go all the way down the East Taxiway. We could probably get up to 4 lots, depending on the size of hangar that people are interested in building along the East Taxiway. Right now, I've got 2 people interested, but 4 people inquiring.
And if I might, Mayor Richmond, I'm wondering, because of the amount of material that's been taken out of the river by the PVDD, we might take a look at accessing some of that material to start, getting rid of their supply, but also maybe to start doing some fill. So that's just another question at a future meeting that we could maybe discuss.
We did that in the past, didn't we, too?
We've definitely asked and not been successful in getting the bill.
So some of the, I mean, and I want to make sure I'm not leaking to in camera here. Like the fill often, as you know, when we do the contract for the removal, generally the contractor, part of the deal is that it's their material
Right.
to work with, right? But I think it's definitely something. There's enough dirt coming out of the river, so
Further conversation again, we could try have a conversation about it again.
keep it on the radar for sure.
Yeah, I think we should, and we have a new manager there that might be different feedback. Thank you very much.
Did you have your hand up? Stop playing concepts. Any further questions? Okay, would somebody like to make the motion as presented? Councillor Nightingale, second by Councillor Ramsden. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Which leads into 10.3, the fees and charges bylaw.
And Ms. Burns. Don't need to call it Ms. Raker. So a couple of years ago, we consolidated all of our fees into one fees and charges bylaw. The advantage of that is that we can look at our fees and charges on an annual basis, and all we have to do is change out the schedule of the fees and charges bylaw as opposed to doing each and every bylaw that we're looking to potentially make changes to the fees and charges. So what we're bringing forward at this point is an amendment to the fees and charges bylaw to amend or remove Schedule B, the airport fees, and replace it with a new one. And I'll seek council's direction as to whether they want 6,500. And then because we're making adjustments to the parks and public spaces bylaw, we need to switch out that schedule as well. And then because of the adjustments that have been made to the special events bylaw that council just gave readings to, that schedule needs to be adjusted to remove the line in it. And I'll let Ms. Burns speak to the recommendations on the parks and spaces.
Good, Mayor, thank you very much. So with the adjustments that we have just discussed, parks and public spaces, fees and charges, we made some recommendations based on current fee structures for just the other parks and public spaces aspect at this time. We intend in the future to review all of the fees. However, at this time, based on the demand that we're seeing, inquiries that we're receiving for other parks spaces, and those entities being commercial and corporate events that are requesting use of our outdoor spaces, the previous fee, venue fee, was to be negotiated. So it's more some research that I've been doing for a little while to come up with some fees that would be reasonable based on the type of user that is making those requests. So at this time, I also took it upon myself because we have outdoor spaces that we haven't currently been charging for because of the lack of fees that were in this bylaw, have added categories. So we've added nonprofit, government, or community group, youth and adult rate. We're keeping permitting fees are exactly the same as well as security deposits. We've added a local resident youth and adult fee and added commercial and corporate events, youth and adult fees. The only fees that we would be moving forward with charging for this year would be for commercial and corporate events. And we propose that the other fees would be started as of January 1st, 2024, so that we can allow some consultation with community groups so that they know that we'll be moving forward with some fees for their use of our outdoor spaces. I think that covers the parks and open spaces fees. The adjustments to Schedule Q for special events are more simplistic. We've removed minor. From that, we haven't adjusted any of the fees. We have just adjusted the capacities so that it's 600 to 999 participants is 300. And then all of the other fees that would be triggered if they're expecting additional lobbies to participate have been lowered from what they were previously. So 1,000 to 5,000 would be an additional 100, and then 200 for 5,000 to 10,000, and above 10,000 from there. So those are the adjustments for there. Please let me know if there are any questions.
Wow, any questions? I got one. You know, whenever we've looked at this a little bit over the years, ever since this has started, I've struggled with the commercial rate a little bit. I just wonder what comparables you've used that. I feel like we're undercharging for commercial. I am happy to give the very bottom line cost to our community groups as little as we can charge them by support. Commercial comes in, I feel like we're pretty cheap. And along those lines, I wonder if we should look at a little bit of scaling in that, you know, when we look at a commercial rental of 20 people doing whatever, I won't invent a scenario as opposed to 100 or 300 or 500. It's, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like commercial fee is the same across the board. And like the example that jumps out at me is it's $200 a block to rent to reserve our streets. So for $600, you got all downtown. That seems really cheap to me to lock up our downtown for a commercial event. So I'm just wondering how the rest of the council feeling, whether we want to look at those commercial rates that you have. I'm going to start with Stab, whether you have thoughts on what those rates like and how they compare.
Yeah, so let me begin with the first part of your question, and please interrupt wherever in case I'm on the wrong track. The reason we've done, so I began with base rates. So the current youth and adult rates are based off of the youth and adult rate for local resident increased by 200%. So that's where those rates came from. They're a 200% increase off of the local as the base rate. I reviewed approximately 12 different municipalities, including our corridor. So we are in line with any other community of our size. We're completely average with these fees moving forward for those rates. However, based on the second part of your question, I do believe that the whole parks and open spaces fees and charges do need to be reviewed completely and modified accordingly. However, at this time, I think we need something to move forward with right now before we dive into a much larger process for evaluating fees and charges across the board. You know, moving forward, you know, I had to take into consideration that the category identified as other parks and public spaces. So I had to take into consideration a commercial group wanting to run a clown event at Pioneer Park.
Sounds creepy.
Right? Potentially. However, you know, like a commercial entertainer coming in to do a kids event just in Pioneer Park where they would expect maybe 100 participants and charging $5 a head, right? So making it commercial is the trigger that makes it a commercial event is that they're charging. Right, so or that they're doing, it's the participants have registered.
So it's commercial, but it's kind of community benefit.
To a certain extent, right? So I had to take into consideration all of the different spaces that fall into this other parks and public spaces category currently. You know, moving forward, I do recommend that we have other categories that separate out our specialty areas like the Bike Skills Park, like Dundalk Fields, and then reviewing the barn as well as, you know, village streets and parking lots and things like that as well, so that they're more in line with some different fees for sure. So it's definitely a very it's not like
It's a bigger chunk there.
it's much bigger chunk of staff time to do, if not potentially hiring a consultant
Right.
to do.
Yes, Patty?
Yeah, just in terms of the village streets and parking lots, the fee structure that has been established there is actually based on what the film industry, what is charged through film permits for spaces. So when we did a lot of work a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, on what the film fees, the film permit fees are, we looked at the street rentals, and they are in that's where we got that $200 per block. Was in alignment with what Squamish and the Lower Mainland communities book charge in terms of
a street rental. So that's where that fee came from. It's kind of, when we were trying to build this, we had to sort of look at a whole bunch of different how we would use it. So that would be something that we would look at again, is the film permit fees and evaluate. It's still in alignment with Lower Mainland communities and in Squamish in particular, because they are our closest community that gets a lot of filming. So,
I have some thoughts about Councillor Nightingale first.
Through the mayor, I'm just curious who, number one, if things changed since COVID and who you're hearing from and like what user groups and what that looks like, the types of people, types of events.
Well, thank you for asking, through the mayor. I would say that we are experiencing pre-COVID requests from all of our community groups and nonprofit organizations for use of all outdoor spaces. There's been a little bit of an increase because COVID pushed everyone to be outdoors if they wanted to run an event. So for instance, Sea to Sky does their Mom and Tot Mother Goose program at Pioneer Park now, and they're going to continue to do that, right? So there's definitely a few things that COVID enhanced in how we use our outdoor spaces. And that's one of the wins from that. So that's an organization that is planning to continue to do it outside because they can actually accommodate more than if they were to stay inside. What has significantly shifted is the addition of some new amenities for the village of Pemberton, specifically Denda Fields 1 and 2, as well as Bike Skills Park. And we have built a world-class bike skills park that we are receiving. I think currently we have 8 requests from commercial entities, excluding Porca's request for use of that space. Currently awaiting some decisions on what to move forward with at this time. So that is significant from an outdoor space use perspective.
Just on that, a little bit of additional information. Section 25 of the community charter prohibits a municipality to aid a business. So if we were to offer up our facilities for free to a commercial organization, that could be considered aiding a business. So we have to balance that.
Else? So yeah, I mean, I'm hearing Ms. Burns' answer. Obviously, it's a much bigger, as usual, a much bigger job than I'm thinking. Do you see that with you in the work plan in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, so through the chair, I think that, you know, in preparations for 2024 budget, I think we've all agreed that there needs to be some time taken on this to evaluate, especially when we look at these in relationship to staff time. So really making sure that the charges are reflective of what it takes to administer some of these programs and has the engagement of finance as well.
And I ask not because I want to force it into your work plan, but I ask because one of the things that triggers when I read this is I know how many thousands of dollars it costs to rent a venue anywhere in this valley for a commercial event. It's $5,000 for the afternoon. You know, I won't name names, but at some of these venues around here. And as we, you know, look for potential revenues for our community, I don't want to charge our community groups, but if commercial groups want to come in, I feel like that's something we want to. So I ask if it's going to take a while. Just from that standpoint, and with that in mind, again, I'm the $200 per block still concerns me. I get that it's similar in the Lower Mainland, but it doesn't shut down their whole town in the Lower Mainland for $600, right? Like that's if we were to have an event come in, a filming event, and it took all the downtown, and somebody said, "Oh, wow, I can't get here or there till whatever time." What do we get out of it? $600, you know, I would be pretty reluctant to give that answer. So that's one. And it's on, and maybe it won't even come up until 2026 or whatever the next time. So, but that's one I would like to see reviewed perhaps sooner than later. But I recognize this is a much bigger job and you guys got a lot of work into it. But those are my two concerns, is that we are undercharging compared to local or private providers, as well as the downtown street ones.
I
Give that input.
think I can probably speak for the Kearns when we were looking at doing this. It was really about how do we ensure that anyone who's using the new facilities that have just come online, we're actually
Yes.
probably getting something. So this is kind of a stopgap.
Sure.
Knowing that there's a lot more work that has to be done. This was just a quick, like, let's get this in so that at least the team, the recreation services team has some direction in terms of what they charge, because when you do talk about negotiated rate, which was fine a few years ago, it's very challenging, you know, how do you know, who makes that decision?
Mhm.
So it basically gives the team place to start, and knowing that this is going to change. And then once recreation is fully transferred over, one of the things that has happened in the past is every year recreation brings forward to PBIS and then to the board their fee structure, and it usually comes forward in September. With the idea that the new fees kick in September or January.
Yeah, we usually bring it forward in June and.
You take it in September. So once everything transfers over to the village, council will be seeing these come probably on a yearly basis as it gets reviewed. It will include all of this good stuff.
So then
So we're on
I'll,
our way.
excellent, well, it's a great starting point, I'll let it go then, thank you very much. Would somebody like to make a motion as presented? Councillor Ramsden, seconded by Councillor Craddock, any further discussion? Any opposed, motion carries, thanks to both of you.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
We done with you? Come on.
I think so.
All right, well, have a great day. What's going on? That takes us to number 11, mayor's report. When I was, I just want a quick comment here. When I was sort of reviewing my thoughts about mayor's report in the wee hours of the morning last night, I started going through my SLRD agenda. It's one of the things to report, and I don't want to drone on and on about every detail of the SLRD type meeting. So my goal in presenting the mayor's report is just to keep you, apprised of what activities I'm up to. I also don't want to bore you or the community by going into a bunch of detail. I try to hit some of the highlights. I guess what I'm saying is, be helpful for me if you guys, if you're interested, have a look at the SLRD agenda, or when I'm making a report, I'm not going to go into massive detail. Like we spent 6 hours on budget. How do I reduce that budget to, a report for you guys? So I'm totally open to questions. If you guys have seen anything, heard anything, or you want follow-up, I'm happy to answer. I'll give you some highlights, but maybe just as a general rule, so I'm not giving a bunch of information you don't want. I try to pick out stuff that's very Pemberton related from our meetings. That's just my sort of trying to pull out of 90 items. I'll pull the 5 that are really Pemberton sensitive. So I'm just saying to you guys, I feel like I'm skimming a bit. If you want more detail, either during the meeting, after, before, when you see activity going on, please feel free to contact me.
If I might, I think it's really important that we do hear from you on SLRD, because I know for myself, I want to know what's happening in Candy Beach. I want to know what's going on in Portal Cove, because it's part of what our community has to put up with
100%.
when they're heading south.
100%. No, I totally agree. And I'll try to give you that. And again, those are the highlights that I try to pick up, but I'm saying if your highlights are different from mine and you've seen them, please let me know if I haven't addressed them.
And I appreciate that. And as far as the budget goes, I always pull it up to have a look at it.
And it's the same thing. If you ever want to follow up with me on the budget, then let me know. I'll hit it really quickly here, but if you want follow up, let me know.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
First of all, it's great to see all of the 3 of you at the LGLA. I won't go into reporting on that for the public, but especially our new councillors, I'd love to hear how you felt about it, and give you the opportunity to report on it if you feel like it. But it was some good reminders of information and some great new information. So I'm glad I went down, and it was good to see all you guys down there. My notes. Attended the hospital district board meeting. It was mainly about budget. And I know I've said this before, same thing as my preempt comments there, but the budget requisition remains flat. That is the bottom line for the hospital district, and no capital projects, no expenditures essentially, or no major ones have been approved by the board. And I just want to repeat to you, and I had a conversation with a couple of the doctors at the clinic the other day, and I made it clear to them. One of the things the board has identified over the last number of years is we don't feel that we have had all the local health provider information at hand when making budget decisions. We get presentations from Vancouver Coastal Health that say, these are our priorities, and these are things that we would like you to help invest in and fund. And when I first sat on the board a number of years ago, it was almost a rubber stamp to that. Okay, that's good. Well, we can afford that. We'll do that. And we started scratching our heads as a board going, why are we renovating the oxygen tank farm? Isn't that an operational thing that VCH should look after on their own? Like, isn't this money that we raise through taxation meant to be for local health priorities as opposed to just supplementing VCH? And VCH does wonderful work for us, and this isn't a criticism on them, but it just seemed like the process was skewed. It reminded me a little bit of how, as an old guy watching over the years, how parent advisory committees for schools all of a sudden started fundraising and funding things that used to be supplied through the school board. And that was a normal. Now we fund for whether it's athletics or new computers or things that used to be provided. Felt like a similar relationship developing, and so we started pushing back, going, we want more information from our local providers. From those that the doctors and nurses and health providers that run our clinic, Squamish General Hospital. We help fund the where's that coming to mind? Anyway, we've helped fund a number of initiatives down in Squamish, right through the corridor. That are we feel are super important. A group came to us and said, hey, we really need a new CT scanner. Okay, so we're trying to get a really good sense of what local health providers want. So I spoke to some of our lead doctors at the clinic and said, go do your thing, get on the same page in terms of what your priorities are, because we at the hospital district will be coming to you to say, what are your priorities? We'll write down the corridor. So we're trying to gather that information. And then on the other side, we've said to VCH, we will not fund any of your requests until you provide us with a master plan for the provision of healthcare in our corridor, which you promised us 3-4 years ago, 4 years ago, which got stalled because of the pandemic, very reasonably so. As we started to emerge from the pandemic, there was a commitment from VCH to do this master planning process. But again, we felt we were handing out funds, taxpayers' money, without all the right information, about all the priorities in front of us. So we said to VCH, get us that master plan. Until such a time, you're not going to see any funds. We started that hard line last year, and we're hopeful that that master plan process will be happening very, very soon, especially with the added pressure we're putting. Again, I've spoken to some of our local providers. I know Mayor Squamish was doing the same. I just think we all think it's really important that we get that input from our locals and we get that master plan. We can put it all together. We've all heard from our community, holy cow, Pemberton's growing. Our clinic won't be able to keep up. Where is the clinic expansion on the radar for this master plan? I don't know. I sit on the health board. We don't know. So we need to know this. And until we know that, we don't know how to properly spend our taxpayers' money. So we've kept our requisition flat, all that to say. Which we had upped a couple of years ago. So we're building good reserves. We have a few funds put away for capital projects. There can be some made throughout the course of the year for some local projects. But no capital expenditures have been approved at this point for the reason I said. So SLRD, again, trying to pick out those highlights. The Sea to Sky Trail service is on our agenda. We'll talk about that. There is a zoning amendment bylaw for Area C that's come up, went to public hearing, and it came back to the board for next readings. It's the main focus of the zoning bylaw amendment are around two areas. One around ALR, and the biggest part around ALR was around farm hand housing. And the other big component was had to do with the Wedgwoods. So I'll start with Wedgewoods. The Wedgewoods was mostly about carriage houses and heights of buildings. There was, the public hearing was held a few weeks ago. And in that public hearing, there were comments from Wedgwood owners that the restrictions within the amendment bylaw did not allow for the topography that they work with in the Wedgwood area. Staff has used some comparables from like Alpine, because it's similar sort of topography and that sort of thing. And so that information was taken into consideration and a few adjustments were made. And similarly, a fair bit of input came from the AAC and the just local farmers in general about the farmhand housing and not making it too difficult for farmers to be able to have that housing, what it looked like in terms of like tiny homes, RVs, that sort of thing, and how it fits into the zoning bylaw. So a fair number of comments were made on that as well, and both of those sets of comments have now been incorporated into the zoning bylaw, and as a result, we're going to go back to public hearing. So there was substantive enough changes that it's going to require a second public hearing. It hasn't been scheduled yet, but if you have more interest in it, let me know, and there will be a public hearing on it soon. There was a review of the board code of conduct. This is an older one, and it's not, I think that the board would like to see down the road some sort of capacity issues. I wasn't able to a more extensive review of a code of conduct, but this was a refresh to make sure that we have something. So that was done. And this was a verbal, and again, there's some components that are moving parts that are still being worked out in camera. So I'll try to be careful here, and especially if you have questions, but Little Lake Estates, to really quickly recap, Cataline Creek, as you most likely know, had a debris flow event 10 years ago now, 8 years ago. And it was quite significant, washed out the road, and has put a number of homes at risk. Mapping was done by the SLRD, how many homes are in the red zone, orange and yellow zone to the green. Many are actually on evacuation order. The board and staff, let's say, has been working really hard with Little Lake Estates over the number of years to see how they can help mitigate the issue. So they did reports a number of years ago. There was a couple fixes. The group sort of chose one mitigation fix, to put it simply. I believe it was about $10.4 million then, so I'm not sure what it's worth now. And I reported on this before we went through a process to set up a service establishment. We at the board said we're not going to let staff do this work unless 75% of the folks sign on, agree to commit to the service establishment before we even get going. I think it was like 90% that actually signed on. So staff carried on with the process. The service establishment is being set up. In the meantime, and a couple grant applications have been made. One of them has been approved for $2 million. There is another one in the hopper, which we're feeling very optimistic about. So hopefully between those two grants, that will provide a good chunk of the money to go towards the mitigation projects. And then what's left will be borne by the residents through the service establishment taxation. But with those grants would make it actually quite affordable. So after a number of years, I'm really quite pleased with how the board has directed, and I'm really pleased with how staff has worked with Little Lake Estates to make this happen. But after a number of years of working on it, it looks like this mitigation project will get off the ground, and these folks will get the safety they were looking for. So it's really quite exciting, actually. Maybe I'll just skip to the budget. Again, we spent a number of hours on it. Feel free to have a look and let me know. Bottom line is a couple of items of interest. I think I mentioned it here, or maybe you guys informally, but in accordance with a resolution from the board, all wages and salaries have gone up 6.6 in accordance with CPI at the regional district. There was discussion around it, similar motivation to make sure that everybody's being fairly and properly compensated in relation to other communities as well. So that was brought up. There was discussion around that 6.6, you know, when the resolution was made to follow CPI, it was around 1.5 to here's a 6.6 jump. So the impact is quite significant. So a discussion came up around that, and there is a compensation review that's going to happen at the board as well. So the idea of moving with CPI, the idea of merit increase and making sure, you know, very similar conversation to what we're having here about housing and this conversation. So that was in the open, and then just to let you guys know that that's, you know, right now it's got down to 6.6. We're going to look at the salaries in the context the same way we're doing it together. So there weren't any massive increases. I think UES was the biggest one, a little bit in general government. Pemberton in the regional district saw the highest percentage assessment increase in the other community, which was just interesting to note substantially. But overall across the region, because of assessment growth, even with some of the increases and some of the, you know, some of them are flat, most of the budgets are quite lean this year. It results in a very, very small decrease in the taxation percentage right now for us. So in terms of what our residents are looking at, in terms of SLRD taxes, the percentage at this point, and we're still like we are here, several steps away from approving anything, but there shouldn't be a big financial impact to our residents coming from the SLRD taxation at this point. Is the best way I could summarize all that. Talking about the OCP engagement. And I just wanted to do a shout out to the fire department who did, and I forget what did they call it, was the stair?
48 story, it was story.
50 story something. Basically, it was a competition while the CEO searches for the name there. It was a competition amongst fire departments, and it was a fundraising event. And I think it was like they had to time themselves as a group, and it teams of 8 in terms of running. I think it was 50 floors of stair in full year. And Cam, who couldn't, our chief couldn't make it down, did it from the mill here just to make sure he participated as well. Our group, not that I'm competitive or anything, finished quite well at the top there with all these bigger departments. Even more, and we're super, bottom line is though, they were super proud when they came back, and I bumped into a few of the guys yesterday. As a crew, they were super pleased with themselves and proud of their work, and it was hard. Like it's not an easy challenge. And then on the fundraising side, I think we were like amongst the top 3 or something like that in terms of how much funds our little crew raised. And that's like, you know, there was 47 members from the Vancouver Fire Department there at the event, and so yeah, Pemberton Fire and Rescue was like one of the best fundraisers. And they performed super well. And the best part about it was just seeing how I thought it was a really good thing for them. And they seemed really, really proud of it. Did you get the name?
I don't have the exact name, still searching.
Yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah, things aren't connecting, but they did raise over $8,000.
Yeah. And that's my report.
You were going to talk about the exemption.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. So yeah, Councilor Paddock asked to discuss the exemption with regards to, well, actually, I'll let you introduce the topic. If you want to bring it up.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. I had a bit of a concern that along with Whistler, we're the only place in the province that has been excluded as far as people from other country being able to purchase here. My concern I brought to the mayor was that certainly is going to reduce the ability housing stock to keep up to what we need locally. It could. I think it could also drive prices higher because people, I believe, that are buying second and third properties aren't concerned about a few $100,000, whereas locals, that makes a big difference. And I was just inquiring from the mayor if we had any opportunity to provide feedback, but this is the federal government policy. So as much as our MP, I'm sure, would take it up, it would fall on deaf ears. So they're not going to change it for us. So my next question was, is there an opportunity for us to do what Vancouver is doing and charge a tax on those what I think they call in the city black houses or empty houses that people don't use for a minimum of 6 months a year. So I'm just bringing that forward as discussion because it does concern me big time. I certainly don't want to see our community have huge amount of properties that aren't inhabited and are also not rentals for people locally. So I just wanted to bring that up, and it's a big question, but I think it's something that we really have to take a look at because we're always talking about housing, worried about local and we get into the market. I don't, in my opinion, believe that this is going to help us in any way at all. I think it's going to hinder. Thank you.
Thank you. And did I send it out? Did I send it? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Ms. Fraser put some information together, you can as well see that. Yeah, put it up for any other comments, go ahead.
I would echo your concerns, Councillor Craddock, because in my other job, I actually had to do some research into it, just as the regulations, I think, where they started, they basically defined what residential properties are and got into the CMAs and CAs that I don't think was. It was kind of close to when the law came into effect, that really got out there when it was finalized. And that was a concern because it most of the lower mainland, this applies to, Squamish it applies to, but pretty much anything north of that, it doesn't. I'm not even sure. I think Kamloops and anyway, just within the area, it will be interesting to see what the effects are, but my concern is that it's going to make things worse for us, not better. Which does bring up, I mean, we've talked about it in roundabout ways many times about housing affordability, and we're all aware, particularly during the election, this was a really big issue, is having, because talking about something like a vacancy tax, that could be a really great tool, but I guess I'm wondering is when do we actually sit down and have that conversation? Because I think the vacancy tool, potentially vacancy tax could be a great tool, but I think there's sitting down and really exploring all our options and our tools. And I understand that there is a housing needs assessment coming out. And so I guess my question is, when are we as a group going to have a larger discussion about housing affordability and look at what tools are out there, not just the vacancy tax, but other means. And I know that kind of flows into the OCP process as well. But I mean, maybe this is the time to start talking about when we're going to schedule time to sit down and talk about it.
Ms. Tracy, do you think come into the housing, does any of that get considered in the housing needs assessment and or the OCP?
Certainly, the housing needs assessment through the chair will reveal, I think, any gaps, or that certainly is the intention of the performance of a housing needs assessment. After which, of course, council then would receive that assessment, which would create that space around further conversation. And of course, then having the supportive information in front of you to be able to discuss the nuances of the results.
Yeah.
So in other words, like you said, the housing needs assessment will help us see the gaps we have in our spectrum. And it'll lead to potentially some of these conversations or open the door for.
I think it definitely opens the door and creates the space for you all to be able to have that conversation as to then, then what is the strategy going from there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just trying to think, scratch my head in terms of how we can maybe bookmark it so that, I don't think we can just jump right into a conversation like this right after, but I think that maybe knowing what opportunities there might be to have a conversation about this, or what other examples we can look at in terms of, like you say, it's not the only tool.
Yeah, because it just through merit is. I've been talking about this a lot, there was a lot of discussion around it, around housing affordability during the election, and And, you know, we're starting to see some more provincial and there was a lot more provincial and federal attention being paid to, and we're starting to see funds going out there. And I understand that housing affordability is an incredibly complex question. And I want to make sure that I think this is something that is incredibly important to our community. I think that it was made very loud and clear during the election, and I just would like to make sure that we earmark time to address this, because I would hate to see, you know, 3 or 4 years pass and we turn around and we go, okay, well, we had kind of these high level discussions off the side of other topics versus really sitting down and making time to sit down and talk about this.
Yeah, no, I agree, that's what I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah,
Is
no,
find a
yes.
bookmark for it.
Yeah.
The appropriate spot, so I'm 100% behind you on it. Go ahead.
Through the mayor, I just want to support you in that, Councillor Ramsden, and it sounds like a real work sleeve session, because it's not, with a lot of the stuff is sort of it's piecemeal, it's coming like this, and we need to sit down and get our roller sleeves up and actually really talk about housing, because yeah, it was the biggest issue in the election.
I just wanted to suggest, because we are in the business meeting right now, probably best to find a way forward with regards to that connection to the housing assessment, and then exactly what you're saying, the potential to workshop and see it was workshop and committee of the whole.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, is find that spot, that bookmark for it, so do we want to just leave it with staff and hearing the comments, so we, that, you know, give it to development services manager as well to figure out where is best suited to come back to this conversation, or how?
Yes,
Or do you
it
want a
is.
resolution to that effect?
I don't think you necessarily need a resolution. I think we just need to earmark that when that report is brought forward, then we set aside time to workshop the results of that.
Get that?
Yeah. Sorry, just last night, I want to be very clear, that wasn't me trying to level any form of criticism. We've got so much stuff on our plate. It was just, I thought this was a great opportunity with what Councillor brought up. Just,
I don't know, I'm pretty offended right now.
Yeah, you got your host. You've already got your host.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And you good with that?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing it forward.
Okay, council reports. When? Go ahead, Councillor Nangat.
I'll be fast. I went to the first Pemberton Arts Council meeting. They were very appreciative. There was a council member there. They are planning a fundraiser, an event at the Beer Farmers. They're designing a really cool label that Art Lives Here in Pemberton, with a label on the beer. That's probably for the Easter weekend. They're pulling together a cultural roundtable with people from the museum, dance, library, rec. They're trying to pull all the kind of art people in town together so that they can be more collaborative and use funds more effectively, which I think is awesome. They were rejected from Creative BC for a grant for their Mountain Views Festival, which was really successful last year, but they're hoping to combine a couple more grants so that they can make that happen, because I don't know if anybody went to that, but it was really awesome, right? So that's basically the nuts and bolts of that meeting. I want to say a huge thank you for the conference that we were able to attend. It was great. And I could talk about it for hours, but I won't, but I really appreciated being able to attend and just what I got out of it, and being with fellow councillors and mayor there. It was great. So thank you. And also just want to echo comments about the OCP and give a shout out to Colin Brown, and just going to She and listening to the kids. And my experience was opposite of yours. The first little girl that came up to me was like, I don't ever want Pemberton to change. Tears in her eyes. It was so sweet. It's just like, why does everybody want it to change? Anyways, it was great. And the teachers were so appreciative of the effort made to include them. I ran into another teacher yesterday. And so thanks for that. Yeah, it was great. And I'm really looking forward to the PSS. That'll be interesting. Got it.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say to staff, the change in the council chambers here, the new tables, the setup, the chairs. I think we got that through some funding, but after 15 years of being here, it's nice to change my chair. So it's really a nice setup and I want to say thank you to staff for getting that organized. I went to the BC Hydro open house the other day. Tom also was there. What I'd like to bring to this table is at that point, we got a new map of what they're doing for the site, which is different than the map we saw. So I think the best thing for me might be to, rather than get into it, is to bring the map to administration and ask if they want to do an overlay on what was presented to us and maybe bring it back to a future committee of the whole, because this map here identifies a lot more than what we got at that meeting, I believe. And I know there was a lot of questions that I brought up and certainly Mr. Seaman brought up at that time. So if I might, Mayor, I'll move it up forward.
Yeah.
I also attended the Diking District meeting on the 16th. There was some concern at that meeting that DFO at that point still hadn't issued a permit for removal of sediment for this year. And that window closes today. So if they're not in the ground starting the end of the month, the fish window is gone. And there was some concern that it seemed to be bouncing around this time rather than getting it well in advance. So that's a bit of a problem. Municipal Affairs is also looking very strongly at the governance of the Diking District. Because there's now only two, I think I brought this here before, so they're setting up the terms of reference, including the VOP and the SLRD, to kind of see where this might fit in. I don't know how we would be involved or if we're going to be involved. But basically the feeling from the Diking District, they would like the VOP, the SLRD and Wildwood Nation all to be on board with whatever the outcome is. And if it has to change, whether it's going to the regional district or the village or is still a standalone. They met with Municipal Affairs again to talk about the issues in Pemberton and with the new funding announcements that have come out lately that talk about floodplain issues and money for that. Something we're going to have to look at too. They're going to look at going forward. I know the village approved at our last meeting application for $500,000 to look at engineering for the pump station on the Yarn Canal, and they were appreciative of that. I brought that forward. They maybe missed it or it didn't come up in their meeting, so I brought it to the attention of them. So I think overall the Diking District, it looks like they're in good shape going forward for this year. They, like all of us, are looking for where they're going to go as far as funding. They've had issues for the last number of years, but they're going to move forward with that. I also attended the Tourism Pemberton AGM, February 22nd. It was hosted by the Beer Farmers and Pizzas by Grimm's, so it was worth going. Unfortunately, there wasn't any dessert, so I had to do that myself. Anyway, I think rather than go through it, I've got the agenda here, a message from the president who has returned for another year. Randy Meeker has done a great job, and it's also got the list of all the board of directors. Mark has stepped back this year from his position, and he's still going to be a representative, but he's not going to be on the board going forward. I think there's other issues that he's dealing with. And it also included in here what I think is important to have a look at is a financial statement, something I'm never interested in, but I thought I'd bring it along so everybody could have a look at. Right now, there's a pretty good financial situation going forward, and they've put forward a lot of applications for more funding going through. And Mark did bring to me, because he's the prime driver of it, is the money to finish the arbor out at the First Nation site and bring people up. They've got, I believe he said, federal funding that now tops up everything they need. This project is now fully funded between all the materials and stuff that's been donated, plus the money. And with that, they've been approved, and I don't know what that means, for up to 10,000 people to come following year. And I didn't even ask that question, and so I'll leave it go at that. So I don't know where that comes from and how they're gonna put up 10,000 people. I didn't want to get in the conversation. The conversation was about how proud they were that this is going ahead, that they're gonna start doing that. And I think I mentioned before, the timber framers guild who built the barn is putting this on and going to do the building. And they now have 120 people registered to come up as students to work on the site. And those people pay to come up and learn. So it's pretty impressive. And again, now we've got 120 students that going to be looking for a place to stay for the time to go. And so I thought that was pretty impressive too. So again, if people are interested, I'll leave that full report there. I also attended the convention, which I thought was great. Some of us were able to get together on occasions, and I think that was great for us. I think the interesting thing for me at that, I took the opportunity both mornings to have breakfast with different groups. I met with Grand Forks and I met with Hope, and we had Jen Ford meet as the president of UBCM. But through those interactions, a couple of the things I want to know: where are you going for taxes increases this year when it's projected? The second thing I asked Hope and Grand Forks, what is one of your main issues? Housing always comes up, so I won't go into housing. The second most important thing for both communities was water. And one community has put off any future development until they figure out the water system. That's how desperate they are. They haven't received any grants to this point to do stuff, but I thought that was quite interesting to hear that from communities kind of our size, but also communities that are so close to so much water. It struck me like Hope is on Major, Grand Forks is flooded, so the here on Major, we're in the same situation. Water is one of our concerns. So I thought that was quite interesting. So, but what I got out of there too is, and I think I'd like to bring it forward, as Squamish, I asked them about where they're looking at. They're looking at 5.9. Whistler's looking at 8.5. Most of the other small communities were just in the process where we're at. But most of them said if we can't get 6.6, it's going to be pretty tough because that would just CPI. And the regional district said they were at 12.5. So I think it was interesting conversations. I really enjoyed meeting with different groups and talking about issues, because for me, I like to hear what other people, if they've got the same struggles. The one other thing I did get an opportunity to do, Rob from BC Transit made a presentation, which I enjoyed, but afterwards I cornered him and said, I need to have a conversation with you about this. One thing he did mention, and kudos to our finance department, he said, and staff, he's had some excellent conversations and dealings with our group, and a real good working process. So of course I brought up concerns that the mayor has been working on so hard. But also brought to his attention that he said he really wasn't aware of French school and how many students were going. And I said, well, keep in mind when you're looking at this, those students will probably be using the busing, because they're not, high school students aren't going to get on the bus at 9 a.m. if they don't have a class till 11. Oh, he said, oh, so Whistler's going to be using the buses to come down here. I said, yes. And I think the mayor is talking to the mayor of Whistler right now about where's some funding going to cover that coming this way. So it was a good meeting with him. I'm glad he was there. I'm glad he's always really open to conversation. So it was good to have that conversation with him and just throw another highlight into that we might work with later on. So he was actually quite interested in the fact that, oh, this was going to come here. So maybe we can work with that. So short but sweet. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Anything else?
Yes. So on the 16th, I attended the Pemberton Area Economic Collaborative, and just a couple notes from that. So we did have someone come from Community Futures House Now, and I just wanted to raise it because I had not been aware of it, and it's so they're a nonprofit that offers free business advice and training for small business, as well as some financing opportunities. And they're based in Squamish, but they service from Lions Bay all the way to Darcy. And so they're just trying to kind of get their name out up here because they have a lot of really great resources by the sounds of it. And we had a number of people who actually were not associated, we're appearing at the meeting for other reasons, kind of saying, oh yeah, actually I've worked with you guys before, you were great. So that was interesting to hear and is a resource for our community. The Chamber of Commerce brought forward, which I believe we're aware of, that it just kind of bringing up again that the Tourist Information Center, as well as the Sandy dump, are likely going to have, the Sandy dump especially is going to have to be relocated or decommissioned, and was just kind of highlighting the potential, not potential, the importance of that asset to this community. The next closest Sandy dump is in Function Junction. And then I don't think there's another one until Little. So we did, and then the last one kind of moving forward. So there was some discussion about kind of where this collaborative goes moving forward. And so I think the next steps, and I'll bring it forward for the next meeting, is they would like each of the participating organizations to look at that strategic plan and to look at what might be priorities of those action items for us looking at that and seeing if there's any priorities in there, and then trying to basically combine resources. So, if we have a priority that is shared by everybody else on there, so, kind of saying, okay, this is great. Can we, how to potentially do we work collaboratively? So that was some of the discussion. And then again, I'll just flag this, and I think, larger conversation again, but there was a question raised about the village and the village, as well as other organizations, just kind of valley-wide, is it just looking at the implementation of UNDRIP and additional steps towards reconciliation. That was just brought up again. So I'm just passing that along. And maybe that can be hopefully that would be a conversation that we can have for moving forward. So that's it for the Pemberton Area Economic Collaborative. And any questions on that?
Yeah, no question, but if I could just add to your community future thing, because you're right, a lot of people don't know that it's a resource for us, that it's not, what I wasn't aware of until a couple of years ago was, it's not just for businesses. They will support community groups. So you can access financing, advice, all that sort of thing as a community group too. Like, to me, I thought it was all small business before.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's just different, in all our travels with community groups, if there's financial discussion, they can, whether, and it doesn't have to, it's not necessarily a financial contribution, it's just helping set up their financial resources, whatever it is. So if you are in your liaison capacity, talking to community groups and you think they need that sort of support, point them towards community futures, are a great resource.
And if you need some follow-up or information on it, I was on the board for 10 years and chair for 2 years. So you're only allowed to serve 10 years, but if you need any backup information, I can certainly try and help you out too.
Oh, okay. Yes. Sorry, just to clarify you're talking about the community features. Yeah. Okay. And then my final comment, I'll keep this quick because I'm aware of the time. Just going to been calling it training session that we've been doing, but again, just to express my thanks, that it was incredibly useful. And I will say, one of the takeaways that I took from it is that the importance of procedure with it, so that's a poor way of putting it. The importance of, if your group has counsel, learning, making sure that if you have it, which I think we do, is that ability to maintain sorry, I'm struggling with words this morning. For lack of a better word, the fact that if your council gets along and knows how to work through conflict in a constructive way, which as far as I've seen, I think we do, just kind of they were that importance of kind of maintaining that cohesiveness going forward. And I just wanted to express that, while we were there and hearing about this and some of the problems that the other communities are facing, I was just appreciative of the fact that, like moving forward to this point, it has been really a supportive and collaborative environment, as well as, the relationships, the relationship with the staff and kind of, maintaining and building on the trust that we have and just kind of.
Thank you. Okay. I'm excited, to shuffle my papers.
13-1, sir.
13-1, thank you. So we're on correspondence for action. We have, I think it was 27 letters regarding the playscape.
No.
No, we've got the Sea to Sky
Oh, sorry,
Trails.
13-1A. We have first one, the Sea to Sky Trails. Did you want to provide any comment on this, or does everybody understand where we're going with this?
I do, not to move forward to motion. Or the recommendation.
Okay, moved by Councillor Caddick, seconded by Councillor Radford. Any discussion? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And then 13-1B, there are 27 letters, I believe it is, regarding the playscape. I guess a motion to have staff respond and inform the letter writers that a public engagement process will be ensuing. Moved by Councillor Caddick, seconded by Councillor Ramsden. Discussion. Opposed, motion carries. 3 pieces of correspondence for information. Would anybody like to pull any out or move receipt?
Move receipt.
Seconder. Mr. Ramsden, any opposed, motion carries. Decision on late business. Don't have any late business, notice of motion. Question period. The regular council meeting is now open for questions from the public. Please be reminded that only questions directly related to items discussed during this meeting are permitted. If any members of the public attending via Zoom webinar wish to ask a question, please click the raise hand feature in the webinar controls, and that will notify staff that you would like to ask a question, and they will unmute your microphone when it is your turn to speak. As a reminder, this meeting is a live webinar. It's being recorded and will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Do you have any questions? Second. Right, seeing none, I will look for a motion to go on camera, please. Mr. Ramsden, seconded by Councillor Caddick. You opposed, motion carried.